I'm female, and this happened to me when I was 19. I fled the nest when I went to university and wasn't very streetwise. I live in a nice area of a city, which unfortunately backed onto a very rough area. You could cut through the rough area as a shortcut, but my friends and neighbors always warned me of walking through this area even in the day. It did also have a terrible reputation in general. The last conversation with my neighbor should have made an impact on my way of thinking. She said, "You should be careful walking through there. You can buy guns and knives from the tower blocks, and every year, a girl has gone missing while walking through." I just brushed this off with an immature attitude of, I know best, and it won't happen to me. So scene set. I used to go out partying and clubbing a lot while I was at university. One Christmas, I met my friends in the city and got very merry, and after I staggered out of the last club at 3 a.m., I decided to walk home. My friends begged me to get a taxi, but as a tight student, I said I'd just walk it. They said their goodnights and told me to let them know when I got in. I remember it being very cold. There was some ice and snow, about which was hard to navigate in my skate trainers. I got to the rough area to make my shortcut. It shaved about 10 minutes off my time. I started to walk down the road past the tower blocks when this white transit van slowly drives up behind me. I turned around and they slowed down. As soon as I turned back, they started to creep up to me faster than before. When they were level to me, I turned and looked at them. There was 3 middle-aged men staring at me. They started shuffling and looked like they were getting ready for something. Initially, I assumed they were lost or that they lived in the area. But all of a sudden, they ripped the van around in the road and doing a U-turn up towards me. I've never run so fast in my life. I don't know how I did it. I didn't slip. I didn't fall. I managed to get away safely. When I got into my house, I locked the doors and hid in my bedroom. I messaged my friends to say that I got in okay and didn't mention the night's events until the following morning. I spoke to my neighbor, the one who had warned me about the area, and she said she wasn't surprised. The girls that went missing disappeared in the early hours of the morning, presumably after being at a party or clubbing. I learned my lesson that day and never walked down there on my own again. I also became a lot more street savvy and listened more. I had a few let's not meet moments while I was a student, which I might add at a later date. I can't remember the exact date. It must have been in summer though, because the afternoon was unbearably hot. I don't like walking my dogs at that time because I can't and will never live knowing that they are burning their paws on the ground. Thus, I decided to go right before sunset. Everything's cool, plus I would get to see the beautiful paintbrush marks in the sky. For me, it was a win-win. It was my usual route and there's tons of dog walkers during this time. But instead, it was eerily quiet. You could drop a pin and it would sound like an explosion. Just quiet. I'm a girl, and my number one rule is to never have both earphones in. I watch too many true crime YouTube videos, and I'm a very cynical person, so I tend to be cautious, almost anxiety-driven. Halfway through my walk, I hear a truck. Its tires crunching against the dirt, slowing its pace. I turned over. I was in front of a driveway, so I quickly sped so as to not be in front of it. But instead of turning into the driveway, it kept going and stopped again. My heart started racing and pounding like the rhythm of a drum. It got even faster when I noticed the guy in the car roll down the window. "Cute dogs you got there." I sighed a breath of relief. My dogs are cute, a solid 10 over 10. so it wasn't unusual for people to compliment them. So I said, "Oh, thank you," and continued walking. I almost laughed. I felt so dumb in that moment until I heard the screeching of tires. It sounded like they went 15 to 100 in 3 seconds flat. I was so startled that I flinched. I whipped my head back to see that he had parked right behind me. Then I heard the very familiar click of a car door unlocking. I immediately tried to start booking it into my house. Keyword is tried. One of my dogs doesn't like running, so he stopped and fought against me. She was tugging against me so hard, her collar slowly started to slip off. I picked her up, and right as I did, I saw both his feet touch the ground. I ran. When he saw me running, he immediately got back into the truck and started it up again. I couldn't tell if he was following me, but I wasn't gonna stop to find out. I have never ran that fast in my life. I have a horrible stamina, so I can't run for more than 2 minutes before my body starts giving up. I ran so hard that when I got home, my whole body was aching. I ran into the house almost crying. A few family members were there, so I took my mom aside and told her about it. When we came back out, I looked outside and saw his truck going up and down the neighborhood. I didn't walk the dogs for about a month after that. I hope the guy wasn't successful in kidnapping some other person that day. So, to the creepy truck man, let's not meet again. I got a few requests to tell the story about my ex's cousin after my last story, and so I'll do my best, though I'm typing this on my phone and I suck at grammar, so don't hate too hard on me. I don't want to disclose any identifying details, so at times it might get vague, but feel free to ask any clarification or questions. And again, I'm typing on my phone, so if something is gumbled, let me know and I'll fix it. Beware, this is a bit long and may trigger people who've had serious stalking. I also won't disclose any of the actual physical harm crime, as it doesn't seem allowed on most of Reddit, but there was a harm done, and you can message me if you want the details. Anyone who's lived in the suburbs may have had that false sense of security that I had. I grew up in the rural suburbs, and most of my trauma was at school or inflicted by an adult in my family. So my fear was far greater towards those I knew than those that I didn't. The story would be too long if I told everything, and likely deleted due to the kind of abuse that I suffered growing up at the hands of trusted family members. But it was bad enough to lead me to run away at 18. My parents had their demons and huge faults, but they loved me and desperately tried to get me to move back home. But between my mom's prescription drug abuse, the draw of new love as a teenager, and shame of returning, I lived with an abusive man who was my age and his dad for 6 years, 4 of which we were a couple. Too afraid to move back with my parents, I stayed and suffered his very real physical and mental abuse, to the point in which my family watched in horror as me, an adult, there wasn't anything they could do. I tell you all of this so you can better understand why that I let my ex's cousin stalk, torment, and very much hurt me. I was scared to turn to my parents, both in shame and fear of certain family members, and also fear of being in trouble. I grew up with a fear of foster care lingering over my head, so I also had the fear of cops too. I was young, learning, and full of fears. It started after a Super Bowl party with my ex and his family. We will call my ex John and his cousin Bob. Sorry, I'm not very creative that way. I was freshly 18, freshly run away, and freshly in love, and a freshman in college. Despite running away, I still went to the college of my dreams, till my ex and his cousin caused me to drop out 2 years in. I met my ex through a dating site, old now, but it was called Plenty of Fish. I have video games down on one of my hobbies, and that alone brought plenty of guys. But my ex stood out, as he wrote this long intro 3 paragraphs of saying how he'd feel privileged just to be my friend if he could. I ate that up being young, and he was a talented writer and speaker. He was good looking as well, but being raised by a narcissist single dad. Though smart, he was extremely manipulative. I believed everything he said, including eventually that I was ugly, dumb, and no good. So I believed him when he said his cousin was a good person. I believed him when he said his cousin was harmless, and believed him when he said he'd handle it and not go to the cops. His dad, though a single parent, was well off as a big bank accountant at their corporate office, so the luxury was also blinding to the trap I fell into. While my ex was a horrible person, I can't really write a let's not meet for him, as that was my choice to stay there. His cousin was not my choice. His family was a blight, but his cousin was by far insane. Bob got a girl pregnant at 16 and was in a bit of trouble with the law, as he was 28, but nothing an expensive lawyer couldn't handle apparently. This was not disclosed to me till long after kind of predator this guy was. I met his cousin at a Super Bowl party. Obama had been president for a year, and this guy's political rant was overspilling into obvious racism. Type of guy that I avoided. Though my ex had red flags, Bob had red sea of alerts that most couldn't miss. Obvious he had anger issues from the beginning, but I obviously never guessed predator. At halftime, he pulled me down onto his lap, grabbed my phone, and put his name in my contacts as White Rabbit, then called himself. All while I stare at my ex's family and my ex to help me, but they simply ignored me, even as I stormed off with tears after. No one asked if I was okay, just acted like it didn't happen. Little did I know the barrage of texts that I would get the following day. The ones that stood out to me were telling me my ex was a bad boyfriend and I should break up with him. The one that made me disgusted was, "Do you know why I put my name as White Rabbit?" I didn't respond, so about 10 minutes later he said, "Because I fuck like a rabbit." And some racist reason for the white part that no good saying here. He would go on to message me about, "I can't believe I met a real World of Warcraft gamer girl," and many more. This is how I learned. Not only did he play World of Warcraft, but he was in my ex's guild with us. He'd been in jail for the past 6 months, and a week after that I met him, and he restarted his account on World of Warcraft and would resume his stalking on there too. There was no escape, it felt, and showing my boyfriend at that time the texts and screenshots, all I got out from John was, "Oh, he's harmless. It's a good thing my family likes you." That was that months of messages, drunk rants and political rants filled my phone and World of Warcraft accounts, and it was harmless. Till one day, he showed up at my college a few days after my car was totaled by some idiot running a red light, and luckily, I walked away with just a few cuts and a fractured rib from the seatbelt. He said he was there to give me a ride home because my ex was too busy to pick me up. I honestly didn't know what to think. I called my ex a bunch of times and texted, but he didn't respond, so at least it seemed that my ex was truly too busy. I took this creep on his word and regretfully got in his truck. After the accident, I was rattled and every car sound sent me on edge, and Dickhead decided it would be funny to speed up and drive like he was on Fast and Furious and pretend he lost control of the steering, after and screaming and crying the whole way home. We finally get to the house and he leans over to kiss me. So I push him away, but this guy was like 6 foot something and 300 pounds or probably more. With all the soreness from my cracked ribs and general muscle soreness from the accident, I had very little strength, let alone my 5 foot, 110 pound self didn't stand a chance, even without the accident. I know martial arts though, not great at it, but grew up with it. It was my nerdy older brother, watched a lot of anime, thus enrolling into martial arts, and dragged me along. Enough so I knew though I lacked size and strength, I had the advantage of flexibility. Powering through the soreness, I was able to get free of his forceful hold and use my 10,000-pound backpack, obviously not that heavy, but definitely felt like that with those college textbooks around. And I used the swinging weight of my backpack to throw off his weight advantage, enough to shove him off, bust his lip, and get out of his truck. He proceeded to yell at me obscenities and stuff, then peeled off. As I got inside, my ex's dad was home, and surprisingly, he was sincere in asking what happened and apologized. Though narcissistic, his dad was good at showing face, even if it was probably fake empathy looking back. As a result, I was disarmed from calling the police. I walked upstairs to find my ex jerking it to his weird, gross fetish, and basically just hated myself so much after seeing all this happen because my ex was too busy. Fuck my life, right? I still get tears in my eyes remembering this stuff. My ex really did ask his cousin to pick me up. So I blocked his cousin everywhere and focused on school. But it wasn't enough. He showed up few months after this again at school. I had night classes as I worked at a local diner in the morning. He tried to talk to me, tell me this radical theories about my ex. But looking back, honestly some of them were true, and I was too blinded by worse to see some of them. Regardless, I ignored him and kept walking till he got angry. Eventually, he escalates to yelling at me like a deranged rambling of a sore loser, calling me every name under the English language that he could think of. Luckily, despite it being dark, the campus was populated and security was strong. As I headed to my car, and he followed ranting at me, security swooped in and escorted him off campus. They asked me a few questions, and I told them honestly, and thus, this put his license plate number on a watch list of sorts for them to watch out for. He showed up again a few weeks later, after one of my late afternoon classes, standing by my car laughing. I noped and turned around to walk quickly away, and No Brains Bob followed after running. The parking lot was full of people, so honestly, I didn't feel as scared as I should have been. He runs up to me saying to wait up, and such, but again, I ignored him and walked faster. Eventually, he grabbed my backpack and pulled me to the ground with it. I honestly was in so much shock. I just sat there as people stared. Bob yelling at me saying it's my fault and that I'm a dumb bitch for not listening and many more. After 2 minutes of this, feeling like an hour, 2 large men and 1 skinny guy rushed up and told the guy to basically back off. I don't remember exactly what was said, but he ended up walking off. Campus security showed up soon after and escorted him again off campus and urged me to file a police report. I stupidly called my ex telling him, and he drove up to campus, which is a 30-minute drive, and convinced me not to file with the cops because he would lose custody of his daughter. No, seriously, I fell for that. Retrospect, Bob should never be anywhere around children. After this, Bob started showing up at my job too, asked to be my customer, and etc. I had to explain to my boss why I couldn't serve him, to which Bob proceeded to say that I was a terrible person to my boss, and I only didn't want to serve him because I hated fat people, loudly and awkwardly, making all the customers uncomfortable. And too bad that I'd given her a big tip, if you know what I mean. I'd rolled my eyes at that line if I wasn't genuinely scared. He came in 2 more times, causing a scene, enough for my boss to suggest that I find a different job because it was obvious this was becoming a problem. Then he was back to causing trouble for me at campus. But one night, I stayed late at the library working on my midterm project. That would be half my final project. I stayed till close on a Friday night, and that part of campus was absolutely dead on a Friday night. Everyone was usually at the dorms, sororities, or bars outside of campus. Maybe 10 cars in a parking lot, usually packed so deep that people parked on the grass. As I leave the library that's now closed, I turn to the corner to my car, and my stomach sank. His ugly chrome-rimmed green truck with racer stripes was right next to my car. I ran back only to find the doors locked behind me. Hoping he didn't see me, I ran into the not-so-dense wooded area as I tried to collect myself because I was in a full anxiety attack. But just as I started to calm myself, his green truck drives up, and after a bit, he starts calling out. It was pitch dark, and I couldn't even whip out my phone, as I was terrified the light would give me away. He definitely saw me come around that corner. I just sat there behind this tree, trying to quiet my breathing and crying, which was near impossible as I was having a real panic attack. After he turned off his truck, I knew the rumbling of his truck couldn't cover the sounds of my panic attack, and I froze, except for the massive shaking my body was doing on its own. I didn't think I could move, at which point, someone walked out of the library. Thinking this was my chance, I held tightly onto my papers and ran for it. Now, I'm not a runner, but years of softball taught me that I sure could sprint. I ran to my car, started it, and shaking like I was freezing, I drove, nearly crashing a few times. As I drove off, though, he got into his truck and proceeded to follow me with high beams till I drove by campus police and stopped my car next to it, and he drove off. I couldn't move. I just sat there crying and hyperventilating as the cop knocked on my window, and I didn't even register it consciously. Eventually, he opened the door and asked me if I was okay. All I could do was shake my head no. My mouth was too busy trying to catch my breath from sheer panic. He called for an ambulance as I was in no shape to drive, and my panic attack grew worse as the police officer comforted me. I don't know if it was the relief of being safe or the 6+ months of built-up stress being unheard by my ex about my fears of his cousin. They gave me a shot in the ambulance to calm me down, as soon as I realized why my panic was getting worse. I was having an asthma attack, first one in years, so I didn't even carry my inhaler with me. They realized way before I did that it wasn't just a panic attack, and I failed to realize that in my panic state, I was wheezing. After a full treatment, thankfully, my dad had great insurance and well-paying job because I just lost mine a month before this and had my dad's insurance. The police came into this cubicle, shielded by curtains, but the general panic of the emergency room sounds were everywhere. I couldn't focus. I was hopped up on calming drugs and strong asthma meds that when they asked me questions, I sleepily nodded, honestly, barely understanding the question. They sort of picked up on the fact that I wasn't all there and told me they'd come back later. I soon fell asleep and woke up. I don't know how long after with my ex and his dad, as my ex was my emergency contact and my phone. After the hospital got my insurance card, which was under my dad, I pulled out afterwards. The receptionist told me I should really call my dad. So I did, at 4 a.m. in the morning. At first, he sounded angry. I was scared he'd be super angry, but he soon said he was on his way and hung up. After my dad showed up, his hate towards my ex and his dad was more than obvious and begged me to come home with him right then and there. But my head was so messed up those days, and I was scared of going back home because of so many reasons I conjured up, but honestly, in retrospect, I think I was most scared of being dumped by my shitty ex and possibly being punished or being a disappointment to my parents. I told my dad that I needed to go back with my ex to pack up and get my schoolwork. As I packed, though my ex unpacked my stuff and threatened to rip any clothes that I packed and break my laptop, saying that if I left that night that I would never see anything I left behind again. Scared, I told my dad, and I changed my mind. And this cemented the control that my ex would have over me for 6 years. His tactics of making me stay would only get worse over the years. After 4 years, I wasn't even his girlfriend. He went on Tinder and dated, but refused to let me move out. That sort of control. The police called me a few days after, but by this point, I had too much fear of my ex to press charges. My ex and his cousin were both only children and very close. I dropped out 5 months later after paranoia of looking over my shoulder all the time, Bob breaking my car window, and leaving a dead raccoon in my car. I had enough. I became a shut-in, and I barely left the house. I was too scared to get a job, and my life became fear. I gained weight, and my ex would only use that to further make me feel useless. I cried so much, and I became numb most days. Too much shame and fear to reach out to my parents. After about 4 months of dropping out, Bob brings by his son to visit, proceeds to point at me and look at his son and said, "Mommy," in which his son goes, "Mama?" I had no idea what to think, so I walked away, which made the kid cry, and Bob proceeded to tell me, "What kind of bitch makes a little boy cry like that?" In which my ex and his dad laughed. After an hour or so, he left and I presume brought the kid back to his mom or whatever, then came back to get drunk with my ex. That night, without detail, that might get this post removed, but it left me absolutely broken. It happened at least 10 more times till my ex broke up with me but refused to let me leave, in which I moved into one of the guest rooms and locked my door. I barely left that room for 2 years, and I ended up eating very little because I just couldn't get hungry. I was so depressed. Every time his cousin came over, I panicked. They get drunk and threatened me together. But luckily, my ex was least scared of his dad enough to not break the door. One afternoon, I was making food in the kitchen, trying to regain my strength mentally and physically, and Bob had slept that night. He walked up behind me as I was cooking and started feeling me up. I rejected him, telling him to get away from me, which prompted violence on his behalf. And I spare the details, but I needed stitches. But they would yell up a storm every time they were together, till, at that 6-year mark, that I had enough. I packed everything I owned into garbage bags, threw them out of the window at night, then packed my car to the brim, luckily a hatchback. I drove around the town crying, even at times second-guessing myself if I should go back, even feeling homesick. I was in a bad place mentally, but I got the idea to call up my older brother's best friend that I sorta dated in high school. He posted weeks ago that he needed a roommate, and I asked if he still needed one, and I moved in after a few nights of sleeping in my car. I still couldn't stand the idea that after all this time, moving back home as my mom had completely lost herself mentally, and I couldn't return home knowing that I've had to take care of her when I needed to heal myself. I lived with him on a year lease on very cheap rent till I met my now boyfriend. I got my certificate in information technology and a job at wildlife rescue where my boyfriend is a wildlife biologist, and the scars began to heal. Though in therapy and pushing 30 now, I can honestly say it's been a ride. I fell ill 2 years ago and I can't volunteer in the field anymore, but I still help with fostering. My boyfriend bought a house from his family and we live there fostering wildlife and strays alike to forever homes and re-releases. Though sick with a rare condition now, rare enough it's identifiable, but it's a non-STD long-term virus that my body can't fight off, so it would seem unlike others. I still manage to work from home these days and care for animals, and things are looking better than before. Mentally, I have plenty of hurdles to overcome, and physically, I'm in a lot of pain. But it's still so much better than any years previous to meeting my current boyfriend. Hi, thanks for watching the video. I really appreciate it. If you want to send me a story to read, feel free to do so. My email is in the description of the video. And if you want to follow me on my social media, just to get updates or maybe to talk, the links and info for my Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram accounts are also in the description. And finally, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And turn that bell on to be notified for upcoming surprises. And remember, your fear feeds me.